chain. For small businesses, we will once again extend the instant asset write-off for businesses with a turnover of up to $10 million for purchases of up to $20,000. In this budget, we are making sure small businesses don't get ripped off by other businesses who deliberately go bust to avoid paying their bills with tough new anti-phoenixing measures. And we will invest more in our people, providing an additional $250 million for the Skilling Australians Fund to deliver business with the people and the skills they need to grow their businesses. Tonight we also announced a new 21st century medical industry plan to create more jobs in this fast-growing sector of our economy. The health sector represents 7% of our economy and 14% of jobs. Our plan will provide more support for medical research projects, new diagnostic tools, clinical trials of new drugs, scientific collaboration and development of new medical technologies that can be sold overseas. In particular, we will back in Australian medical scientists through the largest single investment of the Medical Research Future Fund to date of $500 million over 10 years for Australia to become a world leader in genomic research. This is about building another strong and competitive industry in Australia that will generate income for the nation and jobs, from the white coats in the labs to the workers making new medical devices on the shop floor. But it's not just science and technology in the medical industry we're supporting. The government will invest more than $2.4 billion in Australia's public technology infrastructure. This includes supercomputers, world-class satellite imagery, more accurate GPS across Australia, upgrading the Bureau of Meteorology's technology platform, a national space agency, and leading research in artificial intelligence. It's exciting setting up our manufacturing, agriculture, transport and service industries for success. They rely on this public infrastructure to do their own research, develop new products and services and to run their businesses more efficiently. To support companies genuinely investing in research and development, we are refocusing the R&D tax incentive to give more support to the companies that invest a higher proportion of what they spend in R&D over and above what others would just do anyway. And we're backing farmers to create more jobs. In addition to better weather and GPS services, there will be additional funding to protect against pests, diseases and weeds. We are funding new technology to better detect biosecurity risks, and we will increase our efforts to negotiate away technical trade barriers to agricultural exports in more countries. Our 10-year $75 billion rolling infrastructure plan will continue, strengthening our economy, busting congestion in our cities, making rural roads safer and getting our products to market. Tulla Airport Rail, Western Sydney Airport Rail, Brisbane Metro, Perth Metronet, the M1 upgrade, at a more local level, the Shoalhaven Bridge, Avalon Airport, new works on the Geelong line, an electrification upgrade for the Frankston to Baxter line, the Bridgewater Bridge, the Coffs Harbour Bypass, the Bunbury Outer Ring Road, boosting the Bruce Highway from Pine River to Caloundra, and the notorious Section D from Cooroy to Curra, the Bunteen Highway in the Northern Territory, and the Adelaide North-South Corridor. But we always know that more needs to be done. That's why tonight I'm announcing a $1 billion urban congestion fund to support projects at a state level to fix pinch points and improve traffic flow and safety in our cities. There will also be a $3.5 billion Roads of Strategic Importance initiative upgrading key freight routes. This initiative will boost our regional economies and will be backed in by a new funding round for the Building Better Regions Fund. A strong economy also needs strong, accountable and competitive 21st century banking and financial system. We will continue to roll out our stronger penalties, powers and enforcement to take action on misconduct in the sector. The legislated bank levy will continue and the Australian Financial Complaints Authority will stand up on the 1st of November of this year, and our banking executive accountability regime, already law, starts on the 1st of July. In this budget, we're also moving forward with our open banking regime and the consumer data right, giving small businesses and households more control, more choice and better deals. Mr Speaker, our plan for a stronger economy means the Turnbull government can guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. Just because you're getting older does not mean you should have to surrender your dignity or your choices. We're living longer. It's a good thing. We want to preserve and increase the choices of older Australians. To support the choice of older Australians who wish to stay at home and avoid going into residential aged care, the government will be increasing the number of at-home care places by 14,000 over 4 years at a cost of $1.6 billion, in addition to the 6,000 additional places provided last December. By 2021-22, over 74,000 high-level home care places will be available, an increase of 86% on 2017-18. We will also be providing $146 million to improve access to aged care services in rural, regional and remote Australia. We will provide $83 million for increased support for mental health services in residential aged care facilities, especially to combat depression and loneliness. And we'll stand up for older Australians to keep them safe and prevent elder abuse with new support services and a national online register for enduring powers of attorney. In addition to the pension loan scheme and the pension work bonus changes, the government will back the choices of older Australians who choose to stay and work. This will be done by supporting them to transition their schools, providing wage subsidies of up to $10,000 for employees who take them on, and combat age discrimination in the workforce. We will expand the Entrepreneurship Facilitators program and create a new skills and training incentive to provide mature age workers with the opportunity to update their skills. We will help Australians plan for a longer and healthier life with new online skills and health checkups at ages 45 and 65 years, linked to a program that can help them better prepare. We will fund targeted programs run by local sporting organisations and community groups to encourage older Australians to remain physically active for longer. It's all part of our More Choice for a Longer Life plan. For parents and students, our legislation needs-based funding for schools delivers $24.5 billion more over the next 10 years. That's 50% more funding per student on average over a decade. This year, schools will receive a record $18.7 billion, with a legislated rise to around $30 billion in 2027. The issue of funding is addressed. Now it is to focus on how the money must be best spent, to give teachers the tools to equip students to grow and succeed. That is the Turnbull government's focus. In this budget, we are extending the National Schools Chaplaincy program on a permanent basis, with a special new anti-bullying focus. The National Partnership Agreement on Universal Access to Early Childhood Education will be extended a further year at a cost of $440 million. On July 2, the Turnbull government's new childcare package will come into effect. Our new 5-year hospitals agreement, which is being signed onto by the states and territories, will deliver $30 billion in additional funding, a 1/3 increase over the previous 5 years. And following last year's budget, funding for Medicare and the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, the PBS, has been guaranteed in law. This budget includes an extra $1.4 billion for listings on the PBS, including medicines to treat spinal muscular atrophy, breast cancer, refractory multiple myeloma and relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, as well as a new medicine to prevent HIV. Lifeline Australia will receive additional support, as will funding for mental health research, with $125 million over 10 years from the Medical Research Future Fund. The government will also provide support for parents and infants by funding tests for new conditions to ensure that debilitating conditions are picked up at the earliest opportunity. The government will provide $150 million more to promote active and healthy living in the community, improving existing community sport facilities and to expand the support for the sporting schools and local sporting champions programs. In rural and regional areas, we have funded a plan to get more doctors to where they are needed through a new workforce incentive program. 3,000 more doctors, 3,000 more nurses. This plan includes the establishment of a new network of 5 regional medical schools within the broader Murray-Darling region. And we have moved to guarantee rural and remote access to dental, mental health and emergency medical services through increased financial support for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Indigenous Australians also benefit from our commitment to address remote housing needs in the Northern Territory and through our primary health care model. Our veteran-centric reform package will continue with a planned additional $112 million in this budget, as will our support for ongoing veterans' mental health and employment initiatives. And every dollar and every cent committed to delivering the National Disability Insurance Scheme remains in place and always will. The Liberal and National parties can always be trusted, Mr Speaker, to keep Australians safe, stopping the boats and keeping them stopped, protecting Australians from the threat of terrorism, hunting down criminals, giving our defence forces what they need to do their job to protect our values and our freedom, protecting Australia from those who would seek to do us harm and exert unwelcome influence on our soil. This is what the Turnbull government is doing. In this budget, we are taking further action, directly investing to harden up security at our airports, $50 million to upgrade security infrastructure at 64 regional airports, $122 million to enhance screening capability for inbound air cargo and international mail, $122 million to increase police and border force presence and capability at 9 major domestic and international airports. There is also additional investment to improve scrutiny of visa processing and passenger screening and clearance of visitors and goods at our borders. And we're investing more than $160 million to help our police, criminal intelligence and domestic security agencies fight crime and prevent terrorism, including to disrupt, prevent and investigate child exploitation and abuse. And new powers will be sought from this parliament to back in states and territories to crack down on offenders and criminals with outstanding warrants and fines by withholding their welfare payments. Lastly, in this year's budget, the Turnbull government will ensure that the government always lives within its means. A stronger economy keeps spending under control by getting Australians off welfare and into work. After record jobs growth, the proportion of working-age Australians now dependent on welfare has fallen to 15.1%, the lowest level in over 25 years. Improved compliance and better targeting has also assisted in getting welfare spending under control, and we will continue to take action in this area on behalf of taxpayers. This budget includes new measures also to further improve integrity of our tax system. We are cracking down to ensure that the R&D tax incentives are used for their proper purpose, with enhanced integrity, enforcement and transparency arrangements, saving taxpayers $2 billion over the next 4 years. Our crackdown on multinationals has already brought around $7 billion a year in sales revenue by multinationals into our tax net, but we need to do more. We will close down another tax loophole opened up by the Rudd government back in 2008 that gave foreign companies a tax break over Australian companies by changing the tax treatment of stapled structures. We're also further tightening the rules to stop multinationals from fiddling with how they account for debt to reduce their tax liabilities. But the next big challenge is to ensure big multinational digital and tech companies pay their fair share of tax. Over the past year, I've been working with counterparts at the G20 to bring the digital economy into the global tax net. In a few weeks' time, I will release a discussion paper that will explore options for taxing digital businesses in Australia. At home, we also need to shine the light on the black economy. Taxes should be lower, simpler and fairer, but taxes must also be paid. Honest and fair businesses and taxpayers are being ripped off by those who think they are above paying tax. In response, we will be implementing the recommendations of our Black Economy Task Force, targeting sectors where there is a risk of underreporting of income. This is expected to yield $5.3 billion over the next 4 years. These measures include outlawing large cash payments of greater than $10,000 in the Australian economy. This will be bad news for criminal gangs, terrorists and those who are just trying to cheat on their tax or get a discount for letting someone else cheat on their tax. It's not clever, it's not okay, it's a crime. Mr Speaker, our plan for a stronger economy will create more jobs and guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. Our record of financial responsibility means that under our plan, Australians can plan for their future with confidence. We must stick with this plan because it's working. We can't afford to risk the alternative. So to be clear, our plan for a stronger economy is tax relief to encourage and reward working Australians, backing business to invest and create more jobs, guaranteeing the essential services Australians rely on, keeping Australians safe and ensuring the government continues to live within its means. Once again, Mr Speaker, I commend our plan for a stronger economy and this budget to the House.
Hello, this is Budget 2018. I'm Will Ockenden. You've just heard the Treasurer's speech, or you've probably been reading about it on ABC News Online, and there's been a whole lot in it. Big provisions coming up today that we're going to be talking about, mainly those big tax cuts that he's been talking. What did you make of it? Well, we want to know. Put it in the Facebook comments below, or you can tweet about it on Twitter. The hashtag is Budget 2018 or Budget 18. There's two, so that's great. If you've got any questions about the budget, if you want anything answered, if you want anything to be discussed, put it in. That's what we're here for. We want to sort of break down the budget and get it to make it so you can explain it and really understand it. So, as I mentioned, what's in the budget this year? Well, there's those big tax cuts. How much money will you get back? And more importantly, when? There's the S word again, the big S. Surplus, as it's like to be known. And there's also lots in the budget for older Australians. So what's in it there, though, for younger people? We'll put them to the panel of experts over this evening, and we'll get some answers to all those questions. But let's start with winners and losers, because it's always a really good place to start. Jackson Snape has just spent hours reading the budget and has broken it all down to the winners and losers. So let's probably start with what I would imagine would be the biggest winner of this budget this year, taxpayers.
Yeah, so look, we as journalists, we've been in the lockup for the last 6 or so hours, and we've come out now, we've got all this fresh information, and the first thing that we know you guys want to know is how you'll fare. We're going to give you a little bit of information about who wins from this budget and who loses, but there are a few things we've got to remember before we dive in. This is just the government's vision for the next year and beyond. Obviously there's the issue around the Senate, and some of these measures, some of these winners, some of these losers might get blocked in the Senate. So that's just something to keep in mind.
We'll get to the caveats in a minute. Love the caveats. Let's just get to those tax dollars though.
Okay.
What are the tax cuts? What are they all about?
Look, the thing that the government will be talking about for the next year is this tax plan. It's a 7-year tax plan. It comes in 3 steps, 3 stages. It's quite complicated, but I'll take you through step by step. The first step comes in next financial year, and it involves what's called the low income tax offset. So that means low and middle income earners should see, people say earning $50,000, $60,000, should see a lower tax bill of about $500, but that only comes in at the end of the year.
So what is an offset? Because normally when you often hear about tax cuts, you might think, oh, well, I might get the tax back week by week because I'm paying slightly less of a percentage of your overall income to the government as basically as a salaried or casual employee in your pay packet. But this is classified as an offset. What's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, so the calculation for this offset is done at the end of the year. So it's like a little special part of the government's laws that is tacked on at the end of a financial year. You might earn $60,000 in a year. Then you have a tax bill based on that income. From that tax bill, that offset deducts some money. So effectively, you're going to be better off.
Right, and you get it back at the end of the year in one big chunk.
Yeah, and that's right. That's the other interesting thing about this. These low and middle income earners, these are typically people who are watching, the ins and outs of their budgets quite closely. And the government's talking up, something in the order of $10 a week. But you're not actually going to be feeling that each week. You're only going to get that money at the end of the financial year when you do your tax.
And then you'd be presumably responsible for budgeting that money out throughout the year.
Exactly.
So you do get all the money in the end. You just got to not spend it all at once.
Yeah, more or less, yeah. The other component of this, the first step, is a slight threshold change. I think the second tax threshold is expanding from 87,000, the top end from 87 to 90,000. So that means slightly more wealthier people will pay slightly less tax. It doesn't have a huge impact. It's only going to affect people earning between $87,000 and $90,000 next year.
April wants to speak to you or Yaz.
Sure.
On Sweety's phone, if you've got a moment.
Yeah, cool. Should probably talk to the producer while we continue talking here. So the second that you said, there's three parts.
Yeah.
The second element of this is more about what the government likes to call the tax brackets. Is that basically what we're talking about here?
Let's break it down. So it's a 7-year program. This first year one, it's got some benefits for low middle income earners. Then the second step doesn't really kick in for 4 years, and that focuses on bracket creep, or as people's economies grow by inflation, naturally they move up the tax bracket, so they'll be paying more money, even though proportionally they're still about in the middle of the wealthy people in Australia. This second reform, it expands out that middle tax bracket again further, and also adds another low and middle income tax offset. So but that's it's 4 years down the line. Lots can happen before then, and this is a big money headline piece. It's going to be heavily debated over the next 4 years.
We're going to get into a little more about the politics of tax cuts and how they might get through the Senate later on with Sabra Lane, who's coming in to sort of guide us through the political element. So let's move on to the next winner, as you said. Superannuation balances is what we sort of gave it to. Yeah. Can a superannuation balance be a winner, or is it the people, particularly young people, who are paying who are paying elements of superannuation?
I don't know, Will, if you're like me. I've worked maybe 6 or 7 jobs, and I'm 35, and I have a different super account for every job I've worked, and I've gone back and tried to work out which super funds I'm with. Often it's very difficult, and many people who have casual work, for example, or just have a number of different employers over their youth, they find it hard to keep track of their balances. What that means, the government really wants to ensure that people are getting value out of their super. If people have higher superannuation balances, remember, it means they won't ultimately be a burden on the pension system later on. So the government really wants people to look after their super. This budget, they really want to talk about a few things when it comes to super, specifically this automatic consolidation, where for balances under $6,000, the government's making sure that all those super accounts are transferred into the ATO, and then the ATO theoretically will proactively match those balances with their account holders. So we'll get the robots in to try and help us with that one.
Okay, so it's the government saying to superannuation people, all right, we want to kind of like make it easy for your super not to go missing, especially younger people who... This often happens, doesn't it, when you've got like lots of jobs, like you might get a job in a cafe, you might get a job as a temp in an office, and you get 2 separate super funds, and you're paying 2 sets of fees and insurance on both. The government wants to make it, to give you the opt-out ability for the insurance if that comes, and also if you want to roll them in, you don't have to pay fees.
There are a lot of technical components to this.
Of the superannuation system. Who would have thought?
Yeah. One part is the superannuation insurance, where they're doing some work.
Yeah.
But the easier things to understand really are those low balance accounts getting transferred to the ATO, them trying to match those up. But also they're going to make it easier for you to change funds. So this is a key part. You should just be able to, at no fee, very easily move from one fund to another if you want to.
All right, another winner. Let's move on. Older people, definitely winners of this budget. Why?
I suppose there's 3 important parts to this this budget when it comes to older Australians. The first one is they've tweaked this scheme that allows pensioners to work a little bit, so to earn a little bit of extra money on top of their pension. They've tweaked it a little bit so they can earn a little bit more, and actually it won't eat into their pension. Ultimately, it allows them to work more, earn more income, but not reduce those government payments.
It's about, what, $50 a week, wasn't it? It's about $250 to $300 before you lose your pension.
Yeah, around that figure. The other key parts are this pension loan scheme. This is a very few people had heard of this at the start of today, really. This is a scheme where essentially pensioners or even people of retirement age, 65 and a half and over, if they have a house and they are seeking some retirement income, they can trade in the value of their house to get weekly payments to meet things like food, going to the movies, just to have a better life. They can exchange the value in that house for some of those short-term needs.
So really interestingly, on Twitter, and if you are watching on Twitter, the hashtag is Budget 2018 or Budget 18. But
I like 2018.
Yeah, well, it's a bit longer. Oh, no, you get more characters on Twitter now, don't you? There's an interesting hashtag, though, that's popped up. Hashtag Keep My $10. And we're noticing a lot of people now on Twitter using this. So Nell says, keep my $10 and call an election. It's a similar sort of view from Izzy, who wants to keep my $10 and create effective recycling schemes. Obviously, a broader issue there about other sort of things. And Nikki says, keep my $10 and start answering the phones at Centrelink. So that's sort of a hashtag which seems that some people, well, definitely some people on Twitter would prefer the money to be kept in government coffers rather than handing it back. Obviously, that's not going to be the same view for everyone. The $10 for some people is going to be very, very helpful. But on the Centrelink issue, you have put down one of the losers this year as welfare recipients.
Yeah.
Why was that?
A couple of things with regards to welfare recipients. You may remember a situation a couple of years ago called Robo-Debt. I'll give you a bit of background to it. So there's the Department of Human Services. They hand out welfare payments. Then there's the ATO, which you have to report your income to. Traditionally, in years gone by, there's been a manual process to check between the figures that the ATO have, match those figures that the Department of Human Services has. Then in about 2016, they brought in a computer system to do this matching, and the result was they sent out thousands of letters demanding repayment of welfare payments from welfare recipients, and a lot of these have proven to be incorrect. The computer just didn't do a very good job of it. Now what's happened is there's a new data matching scheme in this budget. It doesn't come in for a few years, but the government reckons they can claw back another $370 million from welfare recipients. So we'll see if the robots get any better in the next 3 years. But that, the government will be hoping that they don't find those kind of problems again.
And the final loser tonight are cash lovers.
Oh yeah,
people who love cash, but in particular large amounts of cash. Why have you put this in?
One of the key parts of this budget for the government is also tackling what's called the black economy. So this is, you might know it as the cash economy. I think the government's trying to portray it as something a little bit more evil than just the cash economy. These are businesses using cash payments to avoid claiming, to underreporting their income. And what that means is those cash payments aren't really taxed, and so they're kind of getting around the tax system. The government are doing a few things when it comes to this black economy: more investigation powers, task forces. But the one that's going to stand out to people is this requirement that any payment of $10,000 or more to a business will not be able to be made in cash. It can be a check, it can be an electronic transfer. But if you like going down to the local Westfield, pulling out the wallet and flashing the cash around, then
no more.
No, this might be. The
and so
end of
this
that.
is like Scott Morrison was just talking about this in his speech. This seems to be one of the areas that they're going to try and raise a lot more money, kind of claw this money back that people might be avoiding tax, for example. It's like billions of dollars. They reckon they're going to get
$5 billion over the next 4 years.
Do you think that banning cash payments, is it going to happen just like that? Is it something that the government will do? Because you can think of circumstances where you would legitimately want to pay $10,000 for something, maybe you're like,
cash.
I don't know, I'd always prefer electronic transfers. Or Bitcoin. No, I wouldn't prefer to pay. There was actually something in there about Bitcoin. There was a blockchain thing. It goes like $7.7 million.
But on that, I think the economy is changing fast when it comes to cash. If they tried to do this 10 years ago, it would have been ridiculous. But now, people are paying on card. There's no such thing as a check. It's much easier to use electronic transfer now than it has been. So I suppose the time is right, or time is more acceptable for the government to pursue this. But look, we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you very much. There's the winners and the losers. Let's just sort of quickly recap. Taxpayers are a winner. Superannuation balances are a winner. Older people are a winner. But welfare recipients and cash lovers are losers.
Yep.
There, you've got heaps more, don't you, on ABC News Online. So abc.net.au/news. You can click on the page. You see all the winners and losers and the reasons behind it as well. It's always a great page, and I love it. And thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Will.
This is Budget 2018, and in just a second, we're going to have Sabra Lane coming in. She's just standing right there next to the fridge. There we go.
Carefully sidled in.
Sabra's the host of AM. You can hear it in the morning, obviously. You're going to have a big budget special in the morning.
Huge,
obviously,
huge.
Probably be a bit strange if AM missed the budget.
Look, it would be really strange if AM missed the budget. It would be a first. But, we've got a big program planned for tomorrow. We've got the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, coming on tomorrow morning to...
answer the questions.
Answer the questions, be probed about his budget measures that he was announced today. And also we'll have Bill Shorten for the first time this year making an appearance on AM so that we can quiz him too about what he thinks about the government's choices. I'm guessing that they've given it the thumbs down as well.
Right, okay, we'll get on to that. We're getting some interesting comments actually too that we'll run through that you might want to put to the Treasurer. Yep. But the tax cuts are the big headline item today.
They are.
What do you think the political message here is from the government? So why they've gone with these tax cuts? Why?
They've gone with these. Well, these tax cuts, I think, in the government's mind, they're hoping that this will completely assuage any bad feelings that people had about the very first coalition budget. Remember back to 2014 when the government cut a lot of services. Big time, because ultimately that helped bring about the end of Tony Abbott's prime ministership. So it'll be hoping that a lot of people don't remember that budget anymore because of the largesse. The Treasurer says the government's collecting a lot of money. That's taxpayers' money and ought to be given back to them. So that's the reason.
So that's
why.
what the government's saying. It's like, and where's the extra money come from?
Well, that's a very good question. In my digging through the budget papers today, the government has had a $26 billion improvement in tax receipts in just 6 months. So their tax receipts have gone up by $26 billion since the last budget update in December.
And tax receipts are just like the money flowing into the
coffers.
coffers.
Money that's come from the taxes that you and I pay when we earn a quid. But also from company profits as well. But I mean, that's a huge figure.
Yeah.
$26 billion. The government, the budget bottom line has improved by that much. So, I mean, that's helped the government to be able to deliver this 7-year tax plan. There's some interesting points, interesting framing that Scott Morrison has put around this today. He stressed in the press conference that he did in the budget lockup that this package was a package in its entirety, that it can't be chopped up and voted on in bits and pieces. So he's basically messaging there to the crossbench as well that this is a package that's got to go through its entirety, not like the corporate tax package, which has been broken up and they've passed bits that have been acceptable to the crossbench.
So what it's going to take to Parliament
it's all
is
or nothing,
this package.
Basically.
So if we want these low and middle income tax cuts that we've just talked about, you've got to get the other ones.
Everything through. That's right. And so this will be the tricky point for the government is that by abolishing, and I'm assuming you've gone through this already, the government is tapering off with increasing some thresholds for tax rates, but they're also getting rid of the 37% tax rate altogether. I think it's 2024. That means effectively, someone earning an annual income of $41,000 will be paying the same tax rate as someone earning $200,000. the government, that is going to be a soft point for the government, because people are going to say, where's the equity in that? Someone earning 40 grand is going to be paying the same tax rate as someone earning $200,000.
So the point of the tax tables normally is so you've got this step up. So
Yeah,
so
that's
lower
right.
income earners pay a smaller percentage
Correct.
of tax than higher
Yeah.
income earners who pay more.
That's right.
But they want to get rid of a whole band,
A whole band.
so that will put more people within that band. And this
It
is
will.
the complicated.
It will put more people in that band, but still, those people earning the higher incomes are going to get a huge benefit. Like, I think a single person earning $200,000 will get tax benefit, I think, from memory, people. I haven't got the budget papers in front of me, that's a mistake. I think it's about $7,000 a year. And someone on the lowest income, or people under on $40,000, I think it's only something like $200 or $300.
Right.
So there's the comparison.
So do you think that this is a clever political move by the government?
Well, yes, it is. That combined with the new low-income offsets that they're also introducing, yeah, it is. It's especially in the early years. This tax package is very much targeted at low and middle income earners. As one of the economists put it to me in the budget, it's a swinging voters tax offset.
Right.
So they're going to be hoping
So they
that,
know where they're targeting.
Exactly.
Is
Swinging
this an
voters.
election? We heard before the budget that this was going to be something the government would say. It's an election budget, presumably. Is it an election budget?
Well, there aren't really terribly many nasties in it. So in that perspective, there really aren't any losers. However, there are some losers, because if you earn $18,000 or less, you get nothing, really, in this budget.
But so there's no real nasties, no real cuts, no real.
Oh, well, there are cuts here and there. I mean, there are some interesting figures. For example, if you dig right into the papers, if you look at their planned forecast spending for housing, for example, like on public housing, that there's a cut of $1.2 billion over the forwards, like I think the outer years, and it's like, well, there is a huge need for social housing in Australia,
Right.
so that's going to be, in the days ahead, no doubt, there'll be questions asked, well, what happens to those people? There's still a big need right around Australia for social housing. Where's that money going to come from?
Do you like? And there's interesting on Twitter at the moment. There's a hashtag going called "Keep My $10." So presumably
Yeah.
it's a lot of people saying
Well, that's
keep the money and make better services.
Well, that's it. I mean, the low income tax offset is $530 a year for, I think, most people who are going to get it. I mean, that's the average amount, and it's $10 a year. That will be it. I mean, people might be arguing that, we want to see more government spending on other things for that, like, maybe housing, education, health, for example.
Well, I think Madeline is one of them. She says take more money from heaps rich people, which is probably not what the government really is sort of going for there.
No.
I mean, there are quite a lot of people that would be quite appreciative of the $530.
Well, look, there will be, because $530. I mean, the Treasurer is right on this point. $530. If it's paid in a lump sum, which it will be, if you're needing a washing machine, there's your washing machine.
Yeah. And the other interesting item, and Henry Bellot has, you might be able to see him behind us. He's been talking about the surplus.
Yeah.
It's going to the big S word. We've heard a lot about surpluses, but
Yeah.
now the government's saying that, like Henry says, that it's
a
going to be
year-
back a year early.
A year early, that's right.
So what is the surplus? Let's just have a quick crash course on that.
The surplus is basically, how much money you're raising and how much money you're spending, and basically we're balancing the books, and next year we'll be in balance, so that means we won't be in the black or in the red, and the year after that we'll be back into surplus, and that's a year ahead of what the government forecast. And once we're in surplus, we can start paying down debt. So that's the other thing, peak debt. Government's recalculated figures, and we actually hit peak debt this financial year, people, which is I think 18.6% of GDP, and so it will start going down from here. Within 10 years, the government's estimating, I think it's from memory again, so many figures today, I think it's 3.8% of GDP in 10 years' time. So it's still, we won't still have paid off debt because you might remember last night Peter Costello, the former Treasurer, said something quite controversial on 7:30. He said he didn't think that debt was going to be paid off in his lifetime. He thought he would be dead by the time that happened. So in 10 years' time, I wonder whether Peter Costello will be around, because we'll be fairly close to doing it.
Well, that all relies on, presumably, on projections, because we can't tell the future.
We can't tell, and these are, as Sir Humphrey would say, they're pretty heroic forecasts.
Which brings up this question: do you think this is a responsible budget? Is the government, like, it hasn't gone splashing cash?
It hasn't, but as I pointed out right at the start, like government tax receipts, they've changed it by 26 billion in the last 6 months. So it's a pretty courageous government that decides to go ahead with a big tax plan like this, assuming that these forecasts are all going to stay as they are. Because we know,
is that the question? Like, if the forecasts, I mean, if the forecasts change and China, for example, stops, like, has a hiccup or trips over or
we're
something,
in trouble, because the government's now committed to permanent spending promises based on a revenue base that may not be there. So that could be problematic. And it was unusual in the Treasurer's speech tonight. He made reference to that it was subject to Treasury forecasts at the time. And I think that's the first time I've actually heard a Treasurer say, that's effectively a little asterisk in a terms and conditions apply, that these forecasts actually might not turn out to be that way.
And then what happens? Do they change the amount of...
Oh, facts change? Does the government change its trajectory? I mean, who knows? We'll have to see how this plays out, really.
Do we know what the opposition's likely to say on this? Have we heard from them yet?
I'm guessing, looking at the tax cuts and where they cut in, that they'll argue that this is more trickle-down economics, that it's the top-end, high-income earners who will benefit the most, that government's doing nothing for people on very, very low wages, under $18,000 and less, that they're doing nothing there. Nothing's been done for New Start recipients. That's another thing. So vulnerable Australians, yet again, are missing out. So my guess is that they will argue that this, like the corporate tax package, favours, big end of town and close friends and associates of the Liberal Party, and not the middle income, working Australians who deserve a break. I'm guessing.
So that's what the opposition might say.
Yeah.
You were saying to me in the lock-up that it's a bit of the government's political push here is going to be that compare and contrast.
It'll be a compare and contrast, because this will also come down to, the government is also being very generous towards older Australians. Like, it's got packages to encourage employers to hire older people, like they're giving them concessions, much like they give young people concessions. They're broadening the loan scheme to allow pensioners and people who aren't on the pension to access equity through, effectively reverse mortgages. So they're doing a lot of things in that area. There's also some more money for aged care places in the home, although this is the thing that I do really worry about, because I think this is a slow burn issue. There's a waiting list of 104,000 people waiting for these home care packages, and the government's committed $1.8 billion to another 14,000 places. Now, 14,000 places, there's a waiting list of 106,000. That's a drop in the bucket. That's another area that I think they're going to be vulnerable on. But the government will point to Labor's policies, that they're making changes in regards to capital gains tax, negative gearing, that they're getting rid of refunds for excess franking credits. These are things that, older Australians, they've invested in properties and things like this. So the government will say this is an exercise in compare and contrast. Who's on your side? Who's your friend? I think that's, going to be one of their arguments as well.
Well, we'll see. You get some answers in the morning, hopefully.
I hope so. Tune in, people.
Thank you very much, Sabra.
You're welcome.
That's Sabra Lane, AM host and political reporter here in Canberra. Now, sliding in again, replacing Sabra,
Hey, Will.
Michael Yanda. How are you?
Pretty buggered after a long day at the budget.
Thanks. Michael's a business reporter and part-time comedian, I think. Yeah.
Just truth teller generally.
That's hashtag. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask Michael about the more intricate elements of the budget, maybe how the tax cuts work, maybe like like when they might come into play, when you start to might see them in your pocket, put it in the Facebook comments, and we'll hopefully try to jump on some. But the tax cuts are the big element of the night. What do you think is the most interesting element of them, do you think?
I think it's the delay. I mean, we don't see the full tax cut package kick in until 2024. That's, 7 years down the road. It's well beyond the period that this budget goes for. This is just a 4-year estimate period. So all the cost of the big part of the tax cuts, that's all in the never. I think in the press conference, Scott Morrison said it was around $140 billion over 10 years for the full package. But we won't see those figures in a budget for another 3 years.
Why not?
Because the forward estimates only go for 4 years, and given that the first big element, the final phase of this 3-step tax process doesn't happen until 2024, we won't even see the first estimates in the budget of how much that costs until we get to that budget, until we get to the forward estimates that include that budget.
So the three elements of the tax, one might be coming soon, and then the other one's a kick down the road.
Yeah, so there's a low and middle income tax offset. Now this has gotten a lot of the attention. It's $200 in the pocket of low income earners per year. At the end of the tax year, you have to claim it back in your refund, so you don't get it in your weekly pay packet. And it's up to $530 for middle income earners. Now the interesting thing about this tax plan, Will, is that actually gets knocked out after 4 years. So when we switch to phase 2, the low and middle income tax offset goes, and it's instead replaced by a change in the tax brackets that basically, increase the amount of money you have to earn to pay the higher rates of tax. And then the kicker is that the final phase in 2024, and there's a lot of numbers here, but in 2024 the final phase is to get rid of the 37 cent in the dollar tax bracket altogether, and so everyone earning between $41,000 a year up to $200,000 a year will pay 32.5 cents in the dollar on every extra dollar they earn. That's a huge tax cut for a lot of upper middle income earners, and also for high income earners who also get the benefit of lower taxes up until the $200,000.
So we're just talking to Sabra about this, but it'd be interesting to hear what you say too. You've been talking to economists as well in the lockup. Do you think that this is an affordable budget for the bottom line?
I think it relies on a lot of favourable assumptions, and I think one of those assumptions too that's kind of baked in this budget is that Australia's immigration rate is going to remain near the record highs that we've been at for the past few years, so around 1.4, 1.5% a year, because productivity growth is forecast to improve a lot, and that may or may not happen. If it doesn't, that's a problem for these budget forecasts. But even if that happens, the budget also needs population growth to bump up the economic growth numbers overall to get to this surplus and pay for the tax cuts.
So what are you saying with population? The population needs to keep growing for the projections or the estimates or the
to come true, exactly. To get both the tax cuts, if they are passed into law, as Scott Morrison has said they're going to try and do, to get both that and an ongoing surplus, you need strong economic growth, around 3%. To get that, you need productivity growth, but you also need population growth to fill that out. Now, the real kicker too, Will, is that population growth, say around 1.5%, but the government's also trying to keep spending growth around 1.6%. So that means there'll be no real per capita increase in government spending on services.
So we got a comment from, on Facebook from Tony, and he says, all well and good talking about tax cuts, offsets, rebates, but many of the lowest paid workers don't earn enough to pay any tax at all, so these measures do absolutely nothing for them. That's, I suppose, if you're earning under $18,500, you don't pay any tax?
Well, there is a tax-free threshold, that's true. And the way economists have put it to me is that being a pre-election budget, the government has very much firmly looked after the middle class with this first round, the first phase of tax cuts. So the biggest benefit goes to those earning, say, between $40,000 and about $90,000 a year. when you're in the middle of that range, you get the full $530 benefit. People lower down on the spectrum, the best they can hope to see is $200 a year, and as you say, possibly even less, certainly less if you're on government benefits.
Why do they do it as an offset, get a one lump sum at the end, rather than reduce the tax rate a little bit so you can get some every week?
Well, it's smart in some ways. For a start, it means it pushes it out into the next budget year in terms of the actual spending. So they're giving back money that they've already taken off you, which, you know, let's face it, it's smart if you can get away with that, and the government can. But also, I think if the thing is, if you change the tax rate or change the tax bracket, those tax cuts actually feed all the way through up the income spectrum. So by giving it as a rebate, it actually does only go to low and middle income earners, not to high income earners. But if what they've done is lower everyone's tax rate by, say, 1 percentage point, even at the lower ends, that tax cut feeds through, because people earning $200,000 a year still pay only, you know, the 19 cents in the dollar on the first, you know, 20,000 odd dollars they earn.
So there's one other element which we found a little bit interesting in the budget was this ban on paying businesses for services or goods more than $10,000, a $10,000 cash ban. What's that about?
Yeah, so basically this is the black economy. Now, the government's had a task force going to crack down on black economy payments, and this is cash in hand. So let's say you've got someone coming in to do your kitchen, and they say to you, look, it'll cost, you know, $15,000, but if you pay me cash, I'll do it for $14,000. Well, that's going to be banned under this proposal, which starts from July 1 next year, because the main reason they do that is because they were planning not to tell the tax office that they'd done your kitchen and earned, you know, $14,000 for it.
Do you think it will raise the money that they think that they think they'll get back from it?
Well, it's a big question. I mean, they're budgeting $5.3 billion in extra revenue over the next 4 years. Now, you've got to ask yourself, if there's that much revenue that's being lost by the tax office because of this cash-in-hand payments, why haven't they done anything earlier? There's no answer to that question as far as I know.
Or maybe it's something, it could be something they just found. Or have we got to a point where technology's now able to replace that kind of thing?
Well, I think the ATO for quite some time has had the ability to monitor people's bank accounts and data cross-match, and it's been building up that ability. And so what it wants to do with this cash payments ban is actually to force you to put all your big payments through the banking system, where the tax office can cross-check them and find out if you've been lying to it. And the other interesting one, Will, is there's a few extra professions added to the list, where if you provide a service to a business, another business as a contractor, that business actually has to tell the tax office they paid you for the service. So it already applied to builders, as I already gave the example of, you know, getting your kitchen done, because that's a bit of a renowned industry for cash in hand and under-reporting income, but it's now also going to apply to cleaners, and the latest updates, security contractors, some IT and computer system design, so a few other areas where they notice that cash seemed to be going missing.
There's a few people on the Facebook feed saying nothing for low-income families. Once again, the rich get richer and the poor need to wither away. Is that completely true?
That's not true for the immediate tax cuts. This low and middle income tax offset, that is definitely totally targeted to low and middle income households. It cuts out at $90,000, I think it is, completely. So in the short term, low and middle income win out. But as I said, when you get further out, that offset actually gets replaced by these changes to the tax system that will favour higher income earners.
All right, Michael Yander, thank you very much. Both your articles are online now.
One is, and one will be coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow morning.
I have had I've had a sneak peek, as they say. Thank you very much for coming in. That's Michael Yander. You can check his articles out online, abc.net.au/news. We're about to be joined. Very exciting. PK, how
so
are you?
Exciting. Look, I've been squatting because...
you weren't in the lockup.
No, I'd have to do...
You were doing a radio show.
In fact, yes, we had lots of stuff. But I just heard your brilliant cross with the old Yander, but I want to talk about some of the cuts.
Yes,
can we do
let's
that?
Do that. So what has jumped out at you in the budget?
There's some pretty significant cuts to the ABC actually in the budget.
Right, there is, yes.
There is. Have you been talking about them
I
yet?
haven't mentioned it.
All right, let's do it then, because they are quite significant. So here I am with my cheat sheet. So basically a freeze to save $83.7 million over 3 years for the ABC.
So it's about $28 million a year.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. Now the government's going to argue, like I'll preempt their argument because I know what it'll be, which is it's a freeze. It's not a real cut, but of course that growth is kind of expected. So I imagine that the ABC will have a pretty interesting response, and it'll be interesting to hear what the Labor Party also has to say.
Well, actually on ABC, since you brought it up,
Please.
Someone says ABC to lose more funding. Awesome. So we've got someone that thinks
Yeah, I'm
that's a
sure
good
some
idea.
people will be happy, some people will be sad.
John White says, leave our ABC alone, another $84 million taken from the ABC. You could argue about taken, I suppose, couldn't you? Is a freezing cut? It's not indexed. It gets complicated.
Well, it does, but if you apply the same rules to other funding, I mean, we clearly work for the ABC, but let's park that. But if you apply the same rules, which is when money is expected to grow and then it doesn't happen, it is an effective cut for whatever sector it is. Anyway, there are more cuts. It's not just about that.
It's not just us.
Not at all. Welfare cheats, $229 million to be saved over 3 years. Fraud detection, lots of different measures. I used to cover welfare in a very, very serious and significant way, so I always think it's interesting to see what kind of crackdowns might be expected in that space. So the government wants to make a bit of money there. Migrants. The waiting period for newly arrived migrants to access certain welfare payments is also going to be increased to 4 years from July the 1st, and that's $203 million it's hoping to save. So there are kind of cuts in different spaces, and when you put them all together, I wouldn't say it's a very strong slash and burn budget. That's why people are saying this is a election budget, because we remember the 2014 budget, don't we?
When you compare and contrast.
We know what a slash and burn budget looks like, and it's not like this budget, but there are some cuts. And I don't think they're significant structural reforms, but they're nipping and tucking and taking from here and there. Other ones, overseas aid, official development assistance to be held at $4 billion a year over the next 4 years, saving $141 million. So it's, again, that's not a huge amount, but if you accumulate them and put them all together, I think it tells a different story. And we know from the announcement on Sunday, because some of this the government's already announced, the illegal tobacco stuff will also be quite a significant save as well, and that's in the billions. So I always think those measures are really interesting to look at. What's the budget all about, though?
Yes, well, that's the question.
What's the vibe?
I was
Of course you
hoping
were.
to ask you, what is the vibe for you? And did it sort of live up to expectations the government allowed to be set or set itself?
I think it was exactly what we expected. That's what I think. In fact, I think all of the noises that they made pretty much meant that they were telling us it was this. I think the tax reform package is a lot more significant than I expected it to be in terms of dealing with, in the middle area, bracket creep and flattening the tax rate, which is very much, I think, speaking to their base as well. If you think about the Liberal base, a flattened tax system is probably what a lot of the people who support the Liberal Party also philosophically support. So I think that they've gone there. They want this contest to be with Labor. Of course, we might have an election. This sounds to me, but by the way, this whole budget is a budget that indicates that we probably will have an election this year. I mean, I'm not sure, but it's pretty election-ish. The flavour is very kind of, there's a poll. I think if we see an election, you're going to see a contest between Labor and the coalition a little on this tax stuff. So they've moved the debate away from the corporate tax cut. Labor's going to try and take it back there. But they've tried to move it to people, real people, lower and middle income people. And that's a lot of people, right? That's a whole lot of people. And they want the debate to be around putting money in their pocket. Now, of course, in July 2019, you're going to get this lump sum payment. And a lot of people will get that lump sum payment. Mm-hmm. And Scott Morrison, I think in his speech, really did acknowledge the fact that, okay, this isn't a huge amount of money. He always said that. Don't expect it to be mammoth. He told us that on Sunday. But it'll pay off a big bill. And that does matter to a lot of people. So I think given we haven't seen significant wage rises for a significant period of time now, a lot of people are feeling the pinch. We're all feeling the pinch. I think that people will be feel very warmly towards that. The big reform, of course, comes in 7 years, and I suppose that's almost like a booby trap for Labor, isn't it? Because Labor would have to now articulate a plan that says, no, we won't do that, and an alternative plan on tax cuts. Now, they've already indicated through all of the kind of things they've been saying over the last few days that they want to provide their own tax cuts, but what will be interesting to see now is what different approach they might take.
Right.
And I suspect they will take a different approach.
So on one hand, we've got people saying, keep my $10. That seems to be...
It's a hashtag now, isn't it?
Twitter.
Must
be
be real.
Twitter for a while. But on other, we've got people saying stop telling us how lucky we are with this budget. So it's sort of like the two, for some people this really is a lot, but others, I suppose, on the other side of the view. How do you think people will take this?
Look, it's been a while since you got this amazing budget bounce, yeah? Like you delivered a budget and everyone was like, wow, we just love the government, we want to cuddle the Treasurer. I don't think you're going to get that kind of response. But this is not a feral budget. So you won't see people at the barricades going bananas. Will they be happy that in July 2019 they're going to have a lump sum payment and then eventually, some of those issues around bracket creep are dealt with? I think if the government, it's all about the sell, remember, the Treasurer and the Prime Minister make a convincing argument, they've got to sell this thing, they've got to explain this thing, they've got to make tax interesting and meaningful and explain how it affects people. If they do that well, I think this budget certainly won't hurt them. Whether it gives them an amazing bounce and leads to a narrowing of the polls and a thumping victory, can't say that yet. And Labor's alternative policy is going to be important here because it's a real contest over what they'll provide to lower and middle income people. And Labor's going to want to get in that space. But watch this space because Labor is going to be very keen to take it back to the corporate tax cuts. They're still in there. That's still a very big part of the government's agenda. So Labor will still want to frame this budget as, yeah, they've done that at the edges and, yeah, it benefits higher income people at the end of the 7 years. Labor will be making that argument. But they'll be wanting the focus to be on the banks getting a tax cut. That's what they want this debate to be. That's why they've called it a referendum on this issue. And that's not going to change after tonight. That hasn't changed now because that policy hasn't shifted.
So tonight is budget night. Obviously, it's when everyone starts talking about it. Things take a while to boil down. How do you think the government has started with its sales job? Have you sort of seen any interesting...
I have. I've seen the Treasurer's interview with Lee Sales on the ABC. Hopefully you all have too. And Chris Bowen's as well. I think the speech itself, the kind of way that the Treasurer began that speech, what are you going to do for me? I forgot the exact language. I could pull it out. But, it was a bit of a different way of approaching a budget speech. And I thought it was actually quite powerful, where he turned it back and sort of framed it in terms of the questions being put to the government and then delivered the answers. This is what we think, we want to do for you, and you deserve your money back, which is a central argument that the Liberal Party, it's basically in their DNA, yeah, to say we should be giving you back your money, we shouldn't be keeping it. The bigger question, though, that they will face, and we know Peter Costello didn't make it very easy for them the night before budget, is around fiscal repair.
What did Peter Costello say? Just a reminder.
Well, that he'll be dead before, which is, didn't leave much room for wondering what he really thought. The dead line really got me. Wow, like there's death here. Pretty serious. But is there enough structural reform here? Is there enough paying down of that debt? I don't think that the critics of the government will think that it does go far enough. Living within our means, well, the Treasurer says they are, but do his critics think he is? What's really interesting to see here too is the way Labor's approaching this. They've kind of trying to look better than the government in terms of paying down debt. Remember debt and deficit disasters? You know how there was a big disaster, there was a lot of debt and deficit, and we were very scared. It's less scary now. There's good debt and there's bad debt, according to the Treasurer. There is a paying down of some, but also tax relief for many. Labor wants to throw that back in the government's face and say, no, we're paying down the debt better than you. And I won't be surprised if they provide, at least in their estimates, bigger surpluses and that kind of response. Government will say, yeah, you're doing that because you're taxing people more. And you're doing it through basically making everyone pay more. but at the end of the day, Labor will probably say we're going to deliver a better bottom line. Is that structural reform? Well, that's up to you to decide. And if, people are going to have different views based on their own political views or their own financial status. It was a bit of a boomer budget, definitely.
Yes,
we heard it was going to be.
We're going to be talking about young people next, actually. But,
I'm not allowed to talk about them.
You can if you want.
You're not in that demographic anymore, Karvelas. Shut up about young people. On the cusp, okay?
You actually do have a question. Cass has asked you a question directly. How are the lower income and pensioners doing?
Well, according to Labor, not well, because some of those zombie cuts are still in there. Actually, it's a good question on lower income. The government's pitching, at least the tax cuts, saying, well, they will help lower income people. The ACTU already, I had Sally McManus on RN Drive tonight contesting that, saying no, they're not helping people on the minimum wage where there's been cuts and, blaming the government for supporting that submission. The government saying the Fair Work Commission made the decision and we support the independent umpire. So that's a side debate, but I do think it feeds into this because it is about take-home pay for people, and that's what this is all about, right? Wages, how much tax you pay, what your penalty rate is, your minimum wage. But a bit of a discussion we've been having over the last week, but also the last 10 years, this week, 10 years, forever, is the New Start payment. And that's, of course, $40 a day. A lot of politicians being asked, can they live on it? Many saying they couldn't. Labor saying they'll have a look at it. Well, the government hasn't touched that. So if you're talking about people really at the bottom end, they haven't gone there, have they? There's been no change there. And even the business community, to show what unity there is on this issue, the BCA and the Australian industry group, they're all saying that New Start has to rise. They're saying actually it's so low that it's acting as a disincentive to getting work because people can't even get themselves ready to look like they should be employed because they are so dirt poor. And the government hasn't touched this. So, I just tell you the facts. Hasn't been touched. Is it good for people at the lower end? Well, they're at the lowest end and they haven't been assisted through this budget.
And finally, there's a bit about higher education. A question from Travis. Thoughts on no mention really on higher education. There's a bit in about tertiary. Actually, don't worry about unis. We'll get to unis in just a minute.
He's got someone else for that.
Actually, I think we could probably leave it there. Unless there was renewables, questions about renewables, climate change, environment, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, we know that the government provided, $500 million for the Great Barrier Reef. That's not climate change per se, but the Great Barrier Reef is an environmental measure. They announced that before the budget, so they could get, I suppose, a bit more of a bang for their buck and traction out of that. The government, interestingly, there is actually something very interesting there. They make certain assessments in the budget about how much, and I don't have the figure off the top of my head, apologies, but how much money and bills will be driven down as a result of the National Energy Guarantee that they still haven't actually signed off, but they've made...
Edging that way.
Yeah. Well, they're hoping, aren't they? But they've got to get the states on board. We all know that. No one can dissent. So good luck there. Josh Frydenberg's job. It's a bit quiet on a lot of areas, to be honest, the budget. And tomorrow, I just want to give this little prediction. I know this is a sort of a budget Facebook Q&A, but tomorrow is the dual citizenship decision on Katie Gallagher. Now, it'll be interesting to see, this is the big budget sell day, but how that goes and what the decision is, because that could take a bit of the attention away from the budget sell. The government will be happy, can I say, if it's a negative finding for Katie Gallagher. You can take that attention, they'll say. But if she's successful and gets to stay in the Senate, well, that would be an extra gift for the government. If she goes and and Labor faces all these by-elections, government can go on and talk about tax cuts and how much money we're giving back to you, and Labor has all these by-elections to fight. That will be an interesting space to watch.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And PK, you can listen to it on RN Drive and also on the podcast, The Party Room.
Yeah, there's a special little episode coming out tomorrow.
That
oh, you better.
To it tomorrow.
All right, bye.
What time's it coming out? Doesn't matter. It's out tomorrow.
Earlier, though.
Your podcast app, it'll tell you. You don't really need to know. There's no such thing as appointment listening anymore, is there?
Hello.
Shalal, and the door is in.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good.
Good.
So we want to talk about young people.
Yep.
As PK just said, it sounds like a boomer budget a little bit. And how would you sort of categorise how young people have gone in this budget?
Well, I think there are definitely few things in this that are youth specific, but we can't discount the fact that young people who make minimum wage, for example, will also get a tax cut. So the tax cuts are across the board. They will impact young people as much as they'll impact older people. So that is a really important point to make, that they're not excluded deliberately from this. Obviously, there had been calls for New Start and Youth Allowance to be increased. Youth Allowance particularly is the equivalent of like just a little over $11,000 a year. There was no increase in that space. So that's something that people had been calling for that we didn't see in this budget. There were a few measures targeted at youth unemployment that were fairly interesting here. I think what's important about them is that when it comes to youth unemployment is always quite a lot higher than the national average. Particularly now, it's around 12.5% seasonally adjusted, as opposed to 5.5%, which is the broad unemployment figures. So there's a real need to get young people particularly into their first job. And we're not seeing that happening very much. Last year there was big funding announcements for apprenticeships, traineeships, all of that kind of stuff. Not so much in this year's budget, although there were a few expansions of unemployment programs. So that was there, but it's not really targeting really specific areas of need. So in some parts of Queensland, in the Hunter Valley, for example, youth unemployment's over 25%. So I would have expected there would have been more really targeted unemployment kind of things, but didn't see that.
Not so much.
No.
And another kind of question we're getting is like housing affordability. Some people on Facebook are saying, is there anything on it?
Short answer, no. No. Last year we saw one measure aimed at helping young people sort of get a bit of a boost to their savings if they were looking for a home deposit. This year, nothing on housing affordability. It seems to have fallen off the agenda. I guess part of that is because house prices are cooling a little bit in some parts of the country, but still, if you're a young person trying to get your foot on the ladder, the property ladder, it's really hard out there.
Yeah, and now there's no sort of new provisions, but as you said, there was elements on it last year. Did we find out how they went in the end?
So they started in July 2017. 1st of July, you could put money into your super account, with the view of eventually taking it out to help your home deposit along. But we haven't seen withdrawals. You can't withdraw any money for a year. So basically there's been no withdrawals there will be no withdrawals until the 1st of July this year. So as a result of that, we don't actually know how many people are using it. It was earmarked in last year's budget to be around $250 million. So it'll be really interesting to see, once those figures come out, how many people really use that as a way to get into the housing market.
And we were just talking a little bit about higher education and unis. There were elements for young people for unis in regions and rural areas. Yeah,
that's right. So if you're planning to go to university and you come from a rural and regional area, then you can expect a little bit of a boost, a little bit of a leg up. There are additional places set aside for regional students for bachelor and sub-bachelor degrees. That is, say for example, if you're doing a bridging course or something to get you into a bachelor degree, then there are special places for you in regional areas. There's extra money earmarked for specific regional unis, so the Uni of Tasmania, Sunshine Coast Uni, and one other which has just slipped my mind at the moment, Gold Coast, the uni on the Gold Coast there. So there are a few unis that are individually getting a little bit of money extra. And there's also provisions for rural and regional medical students. So there's a new hub that's going to be started up in the Murray-Goulburn region. That's going to be targeting young doctors who basically want to study in those parts. And that's going to counteract some of the cuts that we're seeing to rural doctors. But it's not all good news, because if you don't get a help debt, so if you're not getting a student loan, then you're not going to be eligible for any kind of government support through the life of your degree, basically. So you won't be able to get AbStudy, AusStudy, Centrelink of any description if you don't have a help loan.
Right. Well, there you go. Thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
And you guys have done a small little, like an awesome video, haven't you? That sort of,
we sure have.
Breaks all this stuff down.
Budget in a minute.
Budget in a minute.
Yep.
And where do you get that? Is that on your...
You can find it on our socials, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or you can find it on Hack's website. We'll have an explainer and we'll embed the video.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. that's Shalala Medora from Hack on Triple J. You can find out the budget in a minute element for them, and it's on their main page, and you can check it out. Now, I was going to talk to Ian Verrender, and funnily enough, that right there on the phone behind me, that is Ian Verrender. I need him sitting right here and not on the phone. But he's not there. So let's just have a look at some of the comments coming through on Facebook. If you'd like to put them in the comments, put them down and we'll get to them. If you've got any sort of finance questions or any business questions or economic questions, put them in right now, because we're going to go to Ian Verrender in just a little second when he gets off that phone. Actually, we'll talk to Brett. People come and talk to me. Brett isn't so much in the finance. He's more in the rural part.
I am in the rural part.
I've been looking forward to rural. Last year we talked a lot about rural tax rates on various things like
Bananas, avocados,
and bacon. And there are taxes this year, levies. And
I'll get in trouble if I say taxes. So they're levies on the honey industry. That's changing its levies. Mushrooms, though, they're reducing their levies. That money is to do with marketing that we're seeing there as well. So they're reducing...
And macadamias.
Macadamias, they're going up.
Yeah.
So more levies there. The government says that these levies are what the industry wants, that they fund research and development, rah-de-rah-de-rah. But
that's true. And the farmers vote for this, don't they?
That's right. They asked for this.
Yeah.
This is what they'll get.
So it's not like it's being imposed upon them.
That's right.
I shouldn't joke about it. I mean, because it is used.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's used for stuff. Okay, so broadly on rural and regional, what is there in the budget for people in rural and regional areas?
So looking at rural people more generally, rural health is the big winner here. So the government's announcing this plan to have medical training in the regions largely. So it's creating a medical network of universities, so using existing unis. And if you're from Wagga, you can stay in Wagga and use the relevant university that's offering a degree there. And the whole idea is that there's been not enough doctors working in rural areas. They're struggling to get people to shift there. We've seen examples of 400 grand, a car and a house, a phone, haven't been enough to get people to shift there. So the government's pitch is if we get people from the regions, we keep them there, train them there, they might well stay and be in that area.
Hopefully not move to the city where...
I think that's their idea. Don't go to the city because you'll never see what there is. You can just stay here, be here forever.
But once you train, do you want to go to... Anyway, so that's interesting. And for agriculture more specifically, it's all about, what, trade?
Trade, absolutely. So in two parts. Biosecurity, because trade in Australia, you rely on this clean green image. But one of the concerns that the farm sector's been having is these biosecurity outbreaks. So the white spots that got into the prawns and wiped out southeast Queensland. We've seen fruit fly get to Tassie recently. And why that's so bad is that Tassie has access into China with its cherries. It's the only one that is there, and those fruit flies risk Tassie losing market access into China. So the government's idea is twofold: an import tax on everything coming in, which is going to rake in about $300 million for the government. So everything that's coming in will get this biosecurity levy on it, and that'll go into making sure that everything's being scrutinised to see that nothing's coming in. They'll also then spend about $100 million on greater enforcement of laws that already exist there, new projects to make sure you prevent and tackle things when they happen. So then that's making sure you keep that clean green image. $10 million, by the way, for a new brand Australia that we can see Foreign Affairs is working on. But then the next stage is the export bit. So there's money that's going to go towards ag trade councillors, and they work in countries where we're tapping into. And the whole purpose of having them is to open up markets so that farmers can sell into. When you get a free trade agreement, it's all well and good, but if you don't have market access, you can't sell into that market. So these people work in country to gain Australian produce access, to keep Australian access when you see incidents like fruit fly breaking out. And so that's what the government says. They're really trying to open up the opportunities that are being presented by free trade agreements.
Right, free trade, love it. And biosecurity.
Yeah.
Victoria says, what about Leatherwood honey? I don't know. Does that apply to the honey?
I don't know. I haven't looked into it.
That's a story for tomorrow.
I think so.
You might have to check. You could put that on the country hour.
Just on the farm sector though.
Yeah.
Nothing for drought.
Oh yeah, we're going to say what's not in the budget.
Yeah, so drought, it's increasingly getting dry in so many places. The story's not just about Western Queensland, where it's been well known how dry it is. You're seeing conditions get worse in New South Wales, in Victoria, in northern Tas. This is when people are sowing their crops and planting them for grain, one of our big exports. If you don't have rain now, you can't get the seed germinating and the crop going. So it's all well and good to have access to these markets, but if you can't produce a crop, what's the point in having it? So there's nothing new there for drought, and there's nothing new there for black spots. A lot of the way the black spot funding is with mobile phones. Yeah, so the way it's worked to date is that the government was able to have wins early on with the first 3 rounds. Lots of the easier places to get to make sure they have mobile phone access. This next bit is the hardest part. There's no new money in there to achieve that. And we saw what happened earlier this year with bushfires and the concerns that people have when they lose their access to their mobile phone. For lots of people, they don't get access. And that's one area that the farm sector has been quite disappointed in not seeing more money for black spots at this stage.
Why don't... there's been quite a lot of money spent to this point on black spots. They wanted, the farm sector wanted a continuation of it.
That's right. And so my understanding why it's difficult for government is as you go through these later stages, it becomes more expensive and harder to do. So the ones you get are the easier ones where the telco companies are there and they're able to get towers up quickly. The funding model works really straightforward. It's harder in these last few areas, but the government's yet to outline how it could achieve it. And the farm sector constantly says this data drought, as they call it, the lack of access to phones, the lack of NBN in their regions is what's holding them back. If they want to become more productive and grow their industries, they need these. There's not a lot in the budget for those areas.
And that might be a future budget.
Well, yes. Well, maybe an election commitment.
What were the farm lobby like? They had their wish lists. What they were asking for those 2 things.
They were the big ones that they were pushing.
Today? What are the reactions?
Look, they're happy that the trade stuff is happening and the biosecurity to maintain that access, but drought is a big one. Like the policy really at the moment is you've got like support for when you get into drought. There's this banking idea where you put money away in the good times to have it there ready in the bad times. But there's no policy from either side of politics to really approach drought in a new way. In some countries they don't even have government subsidies at all. Australia's decided we're going to have subsidies, but people feel it's too reactionary rather than preparing people for drought in advance, and then you wouldn't need as much government assistance when you get caught in it.
And when was the last time we took a new view on drought?
It's been a long time.
Backwards and forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Years and years without a new approach. And Labor says it wants to work with the government, but we'll see if that's actually proved to be the case.
Victoria again was asking about Leatherwood honey. Says we're in the point because the government stripped money out of biosecurity before, and we saw these incursions. What is what's the story around because biosecurity cuts only to now sort of get them back again in a sort of different way?
Yeah, so the way that biosecurity works is that usually in some aspects it's a matter for the states. The way the government really plays a role is when trade's affected and in terms of what's happening at the border. And so that's what this money, the government is saying it's going to be targeted at arrivals of people coming in, more inspections of bags, more inspections of what people might be bringing, but then also what's coming in imports in the freight side of it as well. There has been research funding cuts to biosecurity in the past, and that's where people are saying that if you don't have enough research going into it, then how can you prevent some of these diseases that you're seeing pop up?
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Will.
That's Brett Worthington. He's on ABC Rural. You can check him out on the Twitters. He's gone, so he can't even tell you his Twitter account. Take a seat, Ian. Or you can check him out on his website, and you can see all the stories and check out the Country Hour and various associated stories tomorrow. Now, finally, Ian Verrender, business editor.
Will, how you going, mate?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
So, how's your budget been? What do you think is the most interesting elements of it?
I think the most interesting element was that everything that was in the budget was leaked well beforehand, and everyone was struggling to find a news story out of this, to be honest. Look, there's some interesting stuff there with the tax, and when you really look into it, it's unusual in that the, low-income earners get something up front. Middle-income earners are the ones who've really been targeted with this in the early phase. Your very high-income earners, your rusted on Liberal voters, get nothing at all in the early stages. But as this program stretches out, when you're looking at it around 8 to 10 years, that's when high-income earners really start to reap a bit of gold out of this because... and look, the Treasurer dropped this in its questions as well because this program of cutting back the tax brackets and giving people tax credits costs about $14 billion over the next 4 years. But over the next 10 years, it costs $140. And the reason being that generally when governments give out, tax breaks for people, they muck around with the brackets, right? They move the brackets up, and even if they move the brackets up at the very low end, which is usually they claim that this is helping low income earners, it actually benefits the top end most, because everybody is scaled up a bracket, right? And so the higher up the bracket you go, if those brackets down below get moved up, you actually benefit more than the people down below. So they've been very clever, I think, in the early stages at least, to ensure that the benefits from this flow through to low and middle income people and not to the higher income earners.
And then there's the 7-year element. What's this part with the tax cuts?
Well, this brings in that element that I'm telling you about, where you actually get rid of the 37% tax bracket, so that most people, in fact most Australians, are going to find themselves paying 32 and a bit % tax. So we're going to have a tax system that is far less progressive than it is at the moment. Right? It's going to be not regressive, but you're going to find people on fairly modest incomes paying the same rate of tax as people who are really, really very well off. And is that a good thing? Well, probably not, to be honest with you. I mean, governments and treasurers in particular always rail about bracket creep, the evils of bracket creep, and how we've got to do something about it. But you know what? Treasurers and governments love bracket creep. They just, because for 2 of the 3 years that they're in government, bracket creep delivers an enormous amount of revenue for them, because as people earn more money, they pay more tax. So as a treasurer, you can just sit back and do absolutely nothing and watch all this extra revenue roll in. And then just before the election, you come out and you throw your hands up in the air and you go, my goodness, look at this. We've got bracket creep. People are paying too much tax. And so you offer everybody a tax break and make out like you're a great guy just before the election.
Do you think this is an election budget?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. But on that bracket creep, there's an easy way to fix bracket creep. If anyone was serious about doing it, you could do it tomorrow. All you do is you index the brackets to wage growth, right? So if the wage price index goes up 5%, then all the brackets go up 5%. You know what I mean? So nobody would end up paying more. No one would end up moving into a higher bracket. But no one ever wants to do that.
That would seem to be a costly move.
Yeah, well, it would, you see, because then you'd have to work hard, dream up new ways of revenues or cost cutting to actually get the budget back to a balance.
So you've also been talking a lot to economists who've been looking over this today. What's the consensus over whether or not this is a sort of a sustainable or an affordable budget?
Look, in a lot of ways, the government's been quite prudent in its forecasts, and I noticed this last year really with they were forecasting iron ore prices, and their forecast was I thought pretty conservative. They talked about $55 a tonne, and the half-year update that we had back in just before Christmas, it was pretty clear iron ore prices were going to come in for the year much higher than that. They kept it at 55, and again this year they've kept it at 55. Now, I think they've learnt the lesson of don't overpromise and underdeliver. You're better off doing it the other way around. You're better off saying, look, things, are okay, and then coming in with this stonking great, much better than expected performance. If you look at the amount of extra money that's flowed through this year, about $15 billion extra in tax, and they're only forecasting another 11 or 12 extra over the next 4 years. So, they're not saying, we've got 15 extra this year, we'll do 20 next year, 30 the year after. This is where treasurers have let themselves and the electorate down over the years, really.
And the other interesting element in this is, again, this word surplus. What's your view on whether or not we're going to be returning to a surplus in the budget a year ahead of previous promises or pledges or forecasts?
Look, there's a couple of things that have driven this performance that we've seen, this improved performance. One is we've got much better corporate earnings, and therefore companies are paid more tax, so we've had a bit of a windfall there, and a lot of it's come from jobs growth. But you've got to dig into why have we had such phenomenal jobs growth, and part of it is that we've had a very high rate of population growth in this country, and so we've had a lot more people working because we've got a lot more people actually coming into the economy, coming into the country, either through natural birth rates and also from immigration. And so if you've got a lot more people and you've got a lot more people working, you get more income tax. Now, if, for instance, that people decide, the electorate decides that Sydney, Melbourne, the big capital cities are too congested, we do not want this level of immigration, then there's a bit of a caveat there that you might not be able to maintain that momentum in terms of income tax receipts. And on the other side, with company profits, if the iron ore price, or if China does end up in trouble, and it's got an enormous debt burden, China, so if things do not go well in China, we are horribly exposed to China and we will feel the impacts through lower corporate tax. But, there's always caveats out there for why things may or may not happen, But I think, what they're forecasting is achievable. They've decided in this instance to spend only 40% of the windfall that they've brought in. You would have thought a government that hasn't had a very good run in the polls, facing an election with a windfall, amount of money coming in the door, the temptation would have been to just splurge, and they've not done
held
that.
back.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Let you get off to your next appointment.
Thanks, Will.
Cheers. Thanks, Steve.
Safe.
That's Ian Verrender, business editor. You can see his articles now online as well, abc.net.au/news. I think that's all from us tonight. Thank you very much for all your questions, all your comments across Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. We'll be back on the news tomorrow. You can check out News 24, you can check out ABC News Online. Heaps, as Michael referenced earlier, heaps of new articles ready and coming for you in the morning. So check it out, and we'll see you then. Oh, also big thanks to my great producers Yaz and Miles, and also everyone else at ABC Tech who has helped out and answered my various questions over the last week or so to try and find all the stuff that we've got. So that's all from us, and we'll see you soon.